There are 2.7 million Floridians ages 16 and older that report having a disability, which is over 15% of the state's population. Although nearly 1 in 6 Floridians fall into this category, this subset of Florida's population is distinct from the general population in many ways, a primary difference being their labor force. Despite making up a significant portion of Florida's population, only 22.8% of people with disabilities, PWD, are in the labor force. However, the labor force participation rate, LFPR, for the general population is 59.6%. This is almost a 40 percentage point gap between the LFPR and each population, a gap that has remained relatively unchanged for 40 years. Accounting for the increase in the percentage of people reporting a disability in recent years, as well as overall population growth, a 1 percentage point increase in the labor force participation rate for people with disabilities per year for 10 years would result in 304,813 people with disabilities joining the labor force. We can estimate that adding 304,813 people with disabilities to the labor force would have an economic impact of $111 billion over the course of this 10-year period from 2023 to 2032. This final net benefit is due to an increase of $53.17 billion in personal income, $67.2 billion in GDP, and $1.08 billion in state tax revenue. Additionally, there will be a benefit of 245,912 jobs directly and 331,660 jobs through indirect, induced, and dynamic employment. It should be taken into account that there is a sizable difference between the number of hours and kinds of jobs worked by persons with disabilities as opposed to the general population. Approximately 72% of individuals in the general population who are employed work full-time, while only 61% of people with disabilities who are employed work full-time. The remainder of those who are employed in each population are working part-time. That is, approximately 38.5% of persons with disabilities who are employed work part-time, which is more than 10 percentage points greater than in the general population. The analysis performed in this report takes into account this difference between the two labor forces. Another important factor that tends to differentiate PWD from the general population is the percentage of people in the population under the federal poverty line. PWD experience poverty at a higher rate than individuals in the general population. In 2020, the amount of PWD who were living below the poverty line was 18.33%, over 6 percentage points higher than in the general population. The addition of over 300,000 people with disabilities to the labor force at their current full-time part-time ratio would impact the economy through 245,912 full-time jobs directly and another 331,660 full-time jobs through the ripple effects in the economy. These new jobs, through those secondary effects, are provided into 58,768 through indirect employment, 126,416 through induced employment, and 146,476 on dynamic employment. Looking more closely by industry sector, the three industries that would see the biggest effects in employment gains would be construction, with 71,626 jobs, retail trade with 65,763 jobs, and accommodation hospitality with 41,844 jobs added. In terms of output, however, the industries that would be producing more output for the economy are construction, real estate, and retail trade, producing an estimated 12.81, 11.81, and 10.85 billion to the U.S. economy, respectively. Impact from this 10-year increase to the labor force will impact the tax revenue of the state and local governments. For the state of Florida, the state tax revenue from this project is estimated to be $1,968,579,459 for the 10 years. As money in the future is worth less than money today, we did a present value calculation to find the present value of this amount would be. Using a 6% discount rate, the present value is estimated to be $1,080,379,313. For the federal government, tax revenue is estimated to be $4,276,562 94. The team also calculated the present value for this figure, which amounts to over $2 million. Overall, this total economic impact breaks down to a benefit of $367,000 total per person added to the labor force after the 10-year period. In a scenario where 304,813 people with disabilities who are added to the labor force over 10 years are not obtaining employment at their current ratio of full-time to part-time work, but rather at the same employment breakdown of the general population, if the same percentage of PWB are working full-time as in the general population, adding the same 304,813 persons with disabilities to the labor force increases employment by 617,872 new workers and has an economic impact of $121 billion. This breaks down to a new per-person benefit of $397,000. I would like to informally note 304,813 jobs for persons with disabilities may sound daunting and unachievable. But if we break down the numbers, all we need to do is over the next 10 years employ approximately 20 additional people with disabilities per month in each of Florida's 120 legislative districts. Also notably, I would like to point out that we could close the disability unemployment gap in Orange County with the addition of only 3,050 disabled persons to the labor force. And with Universal's Epic Universe alone expected to add 15,000 jobs to Orange County, 3,050 jobs is well within reach. The results are clear that closing the disability labor force participation gap by 1% a year over the next 10 years would have substantial benefits to Florida's economy.